Man, I really like Avengers Age of Ultron. Like, for some reason, I think that movie gets a little bit of an unfair rep comparative to the other Avengers movies that surrounded it. The first one, of course, it's legendary, it set the standard for what kind of collaborative cinematic universes could present, and then you had yourselves the Infinity War and Endgame, Part 1 and Part 2, thing that happened afterwards, just box office smashing material. But what I loved about Age of Ultron was how Jarvis played a role. Today, we are talking about Jarvis. No, not the one that had a really great philosophical commentary on the state of humanity and belief in the human race with Ultron at the end of the movie, but a Jarvis that the Montreal Canadiens very well tried to get their hands on in a rejected trade. Let's head over to a TV segment posted by the RDS Twitter crew. Take a look at this. It was from about a week ago at 5 and 7 RDS, or 527, excuse me, yeah. Oh, look at me, Anglophone, right? Let's go out there and translate this video segment, which featured Pierre LeBrun. Before the Carolina Hurricanes offer-sheeted Jesperi Kotkaniemi, the Carolina Hurricanes and the Montreal Canadiens were talking about making a trade. Marc Bergevin really wanted a certain Seth Jarvis. This video will be linked in the description, the clip on social media which talks about it, because essentially what we're learning from this video clip is that back before the Jesperi Kotkaniemi offer sheet was made, wherein KK signed a contract with the Hurricanes, the Habs had a week to match it or let him go, and they decided to let him go. Before that entire process went down in the summer of 2021, we had ourselves trade talk with Jesperi Kotkaniemi's name involved. Marc Bergevin was in the market to try to get rid of this dude and maybe seemingly try to get themselves a trade so that they could get some good value in exchange, and making some sort of a trade call or two certainly would be the way to do that. But with the Carolina Hurricanes at the time rejecting the Montreal Canadiens trade ideas, which included this forward Seth Jarvis, Jesperi Kotkaniemi was no longer an attainable option for them, and they were like, screw it, let's just offer sheet the guy. If he signs, if he comes over, we'll give the compensation, and that will suffice as what we're interested in giving up. Now, let's go out there and talk about the player at hand here, and how the Carolina Hurricanes made themselves a really good decision by choosing not to let Seth Jarvis head over to Montreal. Jarvis at that time was just drafted by Carolina. He was taken in the 13th overall spot in 2020, and the offer sheet conversation for Kotkaniemi happened in 2021. So Jarvis was straight up coming off of his Draft Plus 1 season with the Portland Winterhawks, which, to be fair, was a little bit of a disappointment. And I say that with the utmost respect for Seth Jarvis because he was a 98-point guy in 58 games played with the Portland Winterhawks in his draft-eligible season. The year after, he had spent some time in the AHL and the WHL. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, the AHL? He was 18 years old back then. How was he able to play in the AHL? Well, it's because there was a certain agreement made between the CHL and the AHL in that time frame due to the coronavirus, and as a result, you saw teams, for example, in the OHL straight up not play at all, and some of those prospects find themselves into the American Hockey League, and furthermore, you had yourselves guys in the WHL also getting that opportunity too. It's just that the Dub ended up playing some games. They had a 20-something game sample stint, most of their teams did, and Jarvis was slightly over a point per game with 27 points and 24 in that span. A pretty steep decline from the 98-point season that he had the year prior, although I will say that it was kind of a weird year. A lot of guys were getting either double points per game or half the points per game that they had from prior years. It was a very strange season, and I think you normally wouldn't see that kind of thing happen in regular circumstances. But it's neither here nor there, because Seth Jarvis eventually made the Carolina Hurricanes the next year, getting 40 points in 68 games played. His point production declined the season after, although it did bounce back up in the playoffs. Last year now, he had 67 points in 81 games played, and this year he is on pace for 68 points in 75 games. He's got 18 points in 20 games. He is one of the top players in the Carolina Hurricanes organization when it comes to points, just a few behind Sebastian Aho, Svechnikov, Gostisbehere, and Marty Necas, but of course there were some games played that he ended up missing. Jarvis was targeted by Montreal for a number of reasons. The skill that he has, the profile he has, he was almost exactly what Marc Bergevin would be targeting in that time frame. You think about a lot of the guys that provided value for the Canadiens in the 2021 era. You had Nick Suzuki, you had Cole Caulfield, of course you had the bigger aging veterans like Carey Price and Shea Weber, Jeff Petrie as well, but ultimately a lot of the hope for the younger dudes was in that Suzuki-Caulfield duo. You also had some other prospects that were a little bit smaller going out there and making impacts for themselves as well. Pitlick, Farrell, a few other guys in there too. It wasn't necessarily a pattern for Montreal Canadiens to draft super big guys up front. Sure, they had themselves Cayden and eventually Logan Mailloux on defense, but up on the forward side, yeah, no, they kind of went with a bunch of small dudes. That, of course, changed when they drafted Juraj Slafkovsky and eventually started getting a little bit bulkier up front with their forward prospects. But for the most part, Seth Jarvis being only 5'10" actually plays into what the Canadiens were valuing at that time pretty nicely. Quick, nimble feet, lots of playmaking skill, lots of offensive awareness, high hockey IQ, and a really good work ethic too. Seth Jarvis was a lot more slippery in the WHL when he was a draft-eligible guy. He could just go wherever it is he needed to go and avoid big body checks, keep himself safe. It was a really interesting skill of his to be able to work in tight spaces and make it so that he could still be effective despite going up against bigger guys. He could shoot, he could pass, he had NHL projectability, and now he is a sub-point-per-game guy at only 22 years old. So for Seth Jarvis, you gotta go out there and think, what if the Carolina Hurricanes decided against keeping Jarvis? What if Marc Bergevin just had a better pitch? What if he said, hey, this Kotkaniemi dude was a part of our team, he went to the finals, he scored some really important goals. He didn't score many, but the ones that he did score were very important in the Stanley Cup Finals run. And you can have him for a cheap old price of Seth Jarvis. How does that sound? How does it sound to trade away a 3rd overall guy from 2018 for what is a 13th overall guy 2 seasons after? Sounds like a pretty good deal, right, Carolina? But I think at that point, there were already some question marks and some doubt as to whether or not Jesperi Kotkaniemi would actually work out in Montreal long term. There was already a bit of disappointment because he had produced fewer points in prior years. It's just, when you think about it now, like, maybe if it was a 1-for-1 trade and the Carolina Hurricanes said no, I get with hindsight it's a lot easier to say now, oh yeah, it was a good move to say no to that because Kotkaniemi's only on pace for 40-something points, Seth Jarvis is a point-per-game guy. But you think about the context of that time. KK didn't have that same reputation that he has now, where he's overpaid, he's on for way too long, and he might not even really progress to the heights that we thought he was capable of achieving back in 2018 when he was initially selected. There was already some sort of doubt because it was very evident in 2018 that Montreal drafted KK at number 3 just because they needed a center and not because he was the best player available. They passed on Brady Tkachuk, they passed on Quinn Hughes, they passed on Evan Bouchard after all. But when you consider the status, 3rd overall guy, center, could be the next Barkov, could maybe be in some sort of a similar mold, and the Habs asked for a 13th overall undersized WHL forward, and the Hurricanes said no. That's really interesting to me, especially since KK had the finals run at that time, especially since Jarvis had a little bit of a slower season because of the COVID year. It strikes me as kind of odd, but also serendipitous that they decided to decline that type of a move. So I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, how the Montreal Canadiens were so close to pulling off this massive trade that just got rejected, and a trade that could have helped the Montreal Canadiens out in a super positive way had it been accomplished. Because longer term, I mean, you think about Seth Jarvis, he is a center winger, he can play all positions, he could play on the right. If you have Caulfield, Suzuki, Jarvis, sure, that's kind of a small line. But the chemistry, oh boy. Just allow Nick Suzuki to do everything he needs to do down the middle, make a breakout pass once in a while, and you'll have Jarvis to Caulfield setting up goals like there's no tomorrow. It'd be so interesting. And then your second line can be filled with a bunch of giants like Patrik Laine, Kirby Dach, and Slafkovsky. Imagine the size difference in lines 1 and lines 2 if you were to have Jarvis, Suzuki, Caulfield, Dach, Slafkovsky, Laine. Anyways, all fantasizing aside, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about this rejected Montreal Canadiens trade. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.